Have you ever had one of those days, or maybe it feels like every day, where you're working flat out, just treading water in this ocean of emails, meetings, and notifications? You know that feeling, right? That inner frenzy you just can't shake, where you're constantly distracted and impatient? Well, if that sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. So let's dive into this, because what you're feeling is a real neurological thing, and just understanding it is the first step to taking back control. So let me paint a picture for you. Meet David. He is the poster child for the modern manager. He's juggling a dozen things at once. He's mainlining coffee, and he's so deep in this whirlwind of multitasking that he's forgetting about meetings. See, on the surface, he feels like he's being super productive, but really, he's just busy. He's trapped in this state of constant low-grade panic. Does that hit a little too close to home? That feeling of being totally frazzled on the inside, but trying to play it cool on the outside? This has become the default setting for so many of us. But here's the most important thing to get. It is not a personal failing. It's not a character flaw. It's simply a response to the world we're all trying to work in. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to put a name to that crazed feeling you get. Then, we'll peek under the hood and see what's actually going on inside your brain. After that, we're diving into practical strategies for you and for your whole organization to fight back. And finally, we'll talk about the single most powerful first step you can take. Okay, let's jump right in. The first thing we need to do is give this feeling a proper name, because once you can name something, you can actually start to do something about it. The term we're looking for is attention deficit trait, or ADT. Now, the most important part of that definition is natural response. This isn't a disorder. ADT is a trait that shows up when our brains are just pushed way past their design specs by the constant pings, demands, and data streams of modern life. And that brings us to a really key distinction. ADD is not the same thing as AD, not even close. ADD, or attention deficit disorder, is a genetic neurological condition. ADT, on the other hand, is born from our environment. It's purely a reaction to the crazy, hyperkinetic world we've built, a world that asks our brains to track more data points at once than ever before in human history. So let's get into the science of it. Why exactly does all this overload make us feel so frazzled and, actually worse at our jobs? Well, the answer is all about how our brain reacts when it gets totally overwhelmed. Okay, think of your frontal lobes as the CEO of your brain. They handle all the sophisticated stuff, planning, nuanced decision-making, prioritizing tasks. But what happens when that CEO gets 1,000 urgent emails all at once? They start to lose their grip. And that's when a more primitive, reactive part of your brain stages a hostile takeover. And what triggers this hostile takeover? It's one simple, powerful emotion: fear. Now, we're not talking about a bear in the woods kind of fear. We're talking about its modern cousins. The fear of missing out, the fear of not keeping up, the fear of dropping the ball. That feeling flips a switch in our brain, yanking us out of thoughtful, creative mode and shoving us into a crude survival mode. And this kicks off a really nasty, vicious cycle. First, your frontal lobes get overwhelmed and send out distress signals. The deeper, more ancient part of your brain misinterprets this as a life or death threat. Like a man-eating tiger is on the loose. It panics and floods your system with alarm bells. These alarms then hijack your frontal lobes, making it even harder to think clearly, which of course just causes more panic. You get stuck in this loop where your thinking gets black and white, your sense of humor evaporates, and you're literally not as smart. I know, that sounds pretty grim. But here is the really good news. Unlike ADD, you don't need medication for ADT. You can get a handle on it by being strategic about your health and your environment. So let's look at how to do that. The whole strategy really boils down to 3 simple but super powerful pillars. It's all about managing your internal world, your emotions and your physical well-being, and your external world through some smart organization. First up, your emotions. Remember how fear flips that survival switch? Well, positive emotion is basically the off switch. Fostering real, genuine human connection calms that fear response and actually boosts your brain power. This is why working in total isolation can make ADD so much worse. The simple act of having a real face-to-face human moment with someone you like and trust, even for a few minutes every 4 to 6 hours, can be the exact reset your brain needs to keep its CEO in charge. Okay, pillar number 2, the physical stuff. Now, this might sound like basic advice, but for your brain, it's absolutely non-negotiable. Trying to get more done by sleeping less is like trying to drive a car farther by draining the gas tank. It makes no sense. Getting enough sleep, eating a stable diet that avoids those crazy sugar spikes, and getting regular exercise are direct inputs for better brain function. And exercise, especially, creates these amazing chemicals like BDNF and NGF that are basically miracle grow for your brain cells. Even a quick walk can hit the reset button. And finally, organization. This isn't about becoming a productivity guru, it's just about lowering the cognitive tax on your brain. A few simple tricks can make a world of difference. The OHIO rule, only handle it once, is brilliant. It stops those piles of papers and decisions from building up. A short, focused priority list for tomorrow, made the night before, stops you from feeling overwhelmed first thing in the morning. And protecting chunks of think time gives your brain's CEO the quiet it needs to actually do its job. Now, these individual strategies are incredibly powerful, but they're only half the story. Because a lot of the time, ADT isn't just a personal problem, it's a cultural one, baked right into the DNA of our workplaces. So many companies, without even realizing it, are basically ADT factories. They reward the fastest email response, not the most thoughtful one. They celebrate the employee who says yes to every single request, even as they're burning out. And maybe worst of all, they see the symptoms of overload, like distraction, mistakes, and exhaustion, as a moral failing, a sign of weakness in an employee, instead of a problem with the system itself. But it doesn't have to be this way. Some companies really get it. Take a look at the software company SAS Institute. They've gone out of their way to create a warm, connected, and relaxed workplace. They understand that things like on-site childcare aren't just fluffy perks. They're direct investments in their people's focus and brain power. And you want to see the proof? The proof is in the numbers. The employee turnover rate at SAS is never higher than 5%. That saves them millions upon millions of dollars in recruiting and training. It shows that a brain-friendly culture isn't just nice for people, it is fantastic for the bottom line. Leadership is also just so critical here. When leaders, like JetBlue's former CEO David Neeleman, are open about their own struggles with attention, he has ADD, it creates this culture of psychological safety. It gives everyone else permission to talk about their own challenges and to find the support they need to really play to their strengths. So we've covered the neurology, the individual solutions, and the organizational ones. But all of this, every single bit of it, rests on one simple, foundational action. It all comes down to this. The most critical step is to just name it, to bring attention deficit trait out into the open, to talk about it, and to recognize its symptoms for what they are. A normal physiological response to overload, not some deep character flaw. That one act changes everything. It gets rid of the stigma and the shame, and it opens the door to finding real, practical solutions. So that leaves us with one final big question to think about. Now that we know the true cost of overloading our brains, how can we, as individuals, as teams, and as leaders, start to intentionally redesign the way we work so that we're protecting our most valuable asset, instead of constantly pushing it into survival mode?